Welcome back to my channel. My name is Chia, and today I'm going to be doing a video where I suggest books that will get you back into reading. These are going to be books where I feel like it's very beginner friendly, especially if you are not a reader or if you haven't been reading in the longest time like I have. I have always been an avid reader. I started becoming an avid reader when I was 12, and I read up until maybe the end of high school, early college, and after that I started losing interest because I think that's the point where I completely finished a lot of the series that I was in the middle of. I stopped finding books that I was interested in, so I didn't have the fire to keep reading, and I stopped reading up until maybe last year. I did read like a series here and there, maybe 1 or 2 books every single year, but not to the point where I am now, where I've read so many books in the past year. It's insane. These are books that are not very taxing to get into. It's going to be divided into different categories where it's different genres. That's the beauty about reading. I always tell people when they ask me how to get into reading if there are any books that I recommend reading. It just depends on what you're into. I always ask them, what are you interested in watching? What kind of movies you are interested in? There's different genres everywhere, and that's the beauty about reading because there's so many genres you can think of and so many worlds that you can dive into. Anyways, let's get started. The first category that I wanted to talk about is not that much compared to the other genres that I'm going to talk about. The first one is contemporary romance. Contemporary romance is not my preferred genre. It's not really something that I reach for all the time. I am interested in it because it's sort of like a book that I pick up in between my favorite genres and just to have a nice easy time to get into. But there are a few that I wanted to recommend. First, I guess you could say author, or the first book, is Emily Henry. She wrote books like Happy Place and Funny Story. I started recently getting into Emily Henry this year because I kept hearing great things about her writing, and these are the 2 books that I have read that I would highly recommend for a first time or reader, or if you're getting into it. The main plot is the romance. There's nothing really going on besides relationships in this book, whether it be friendships or romance, but romance is the main plot. The great thing about this is that it's not only them growing within the romance, but it's them growing individually. Happy Place is about a girl named Harriet, and she is going off to a little vacation that she and her friends do every single year, and it's set in Maine, and they meet every single year during the summer. But they find out that this could be possibly the last summer they're meeting, since the place that they stay at all the time is owned by one of her friends' families, and they have decided to sell it. So she goes back, but what she's keeping a secret is that she and her boyfriend, who they've been together since college, I want to say, they've been the couple in the friend group. They broke up recently and they have yet to tell their friends. They wanted to announce to their friends when they're all together, and she's kind of been avoiding her friends for the longest time, so they don't really know what's going on with her or her ex. They find out that the place is getting sold. They have to put aside their news of the breakup and want to basically fake date until it's the right time to announce their breakup. It's a story of nostalgia because these friends are basically going through their last summer together, because since they're all graduated now and having their own lives, they are trying to find ways to see each other, and they felt like that the house that they were staying at were their constant security, and now they have to journey through that life. And also she journeys through her relationship with her ex. This book follows a character named Daphne. She lives in Massachusetts with her fiance, and one day when her fiance goes off to his bachelor party, he comes back and tells her that one of his childhood best friends attended the bachelor party. He is breaking off the engagement to try to see if there's a relationship between him and the childhood best friend, and this is her journey of learning how to cope with the breakup, and she ends up rooming with the ex of the childhood best friend. So they end up moving in together because she needs a place to stay, and she journeys through finding friends in Massachusetts because the only reason why she moved out there was for her fiance. So this is a journey as well. The next book I want to recommend is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I did do a reading vlog of this. It's a part of a trilogy, and it's called the Part of Your World trilogy. It's 3 books that are a part of interconnected standalone. I completely fell in love with Abby's writing this year because she not only examines how a relationship is in romance books, but how these individuals deal with certain issues that they have to go through in life, and how they have to go through certain mental issues and character growth and the daily going-ons in life while dealing with a romance. I absolutely love it. I can't do just complete romance in my books because I need sort of like something more than that. Abby Jimenez definitely gives that. The first book is Part of Your World, the second book is Yours Truly, and the third book is Just for the Summer that just came out this year. Next book is sort of a Wattpad story come to life. I hesitate about recommending this book to people because I didn't fully enjoy it myself, but it's such an easy story to get into, an easy love story to get into. It's basically all the tropes that you can think of stuck into one book. And if you know about like fan fiction, Wattpad and all of that, it's literally Wattpad come to life. This book is a bunch of trauma dumped into one book, but kind of like done in a light way. It's hard to describe. This book follows a girl named Ari. Ari and her friends go to a beach house every single year. This is their last summer before moving on to college. She is in love with her brother's best friend ever since they were kids. He hasn't really given her a time of day because that is his best friend's little sister. And this explores their relationship together and the things that happened during the summer, and they also move on to college together. And like I said, it's a bunch of trauma dumping, but it's very, very easy to get into. It's sort of like a bingeable, addicting book that I couldn't put down. So I highly recommend to somebody who's trying to get into reading again, because when you're trying to get into reading, especially how I was last year, I wanted nothing heavy. I wanted something that will catch my attention and give me that ferociousness I needed back for reading and that passion back for reading. And this book can definitely get you there because of how bingeable, and it shows you how enjoyable reading can be. It's not the best written, it's not the best character driven, and it's not a great plot, but I recommend just for getting you into reading. The next book is The Summer I Turned Pretty. The Summer I Turned Pretty follows a girl named Belly. She and her brother and her mom go off to a beach house that her mom's best friend and her two sons go to every single year. Of course, she's in love with one of the guys, and this book also has a series that is on Amazon. And this book is so bingeable. Don't go into it expecting to have the best literary experience of your life. If you go into it just for a good time, and it's young adult, it's incredibly young adult. I read it years ago, way before the TV show was ever announced, and I binged it. I hated the ending, and the characters suck, but I recommend for getting back into reading. And the last contemporary romance book that I recommend for someone getting back into reading is Magnolia Park series. This is Gossip Girl-esque, but make it London, and it follows a girl named Magnolia and also a girl named Daisy Hates. Both girls have their own books within the story. It's about 5 books long. It alternates between Magnolia and Daisy Hates, so Magnolia has her own book and it tells her love story with BJ. I would hesitate to recommend this as a contemporary romance. It's sort of like a literary fiction that follows, because it follows a very, very rich group of friends who they go about daily life, but the main perspectives are Magnolia and BJ, and then the other character is named Daisy Hates, and she is a part of a sort of like mob crime family, and so her book is more mob crime oriented, and it follows her story along with her brother Julian and her love story with Christian. It's really, really good. It follows all of their lives and how they go about certain things that happen in their love stories. Jessa Hastings has a very great way of writing because she's very descriptive but not overly so. That's why I highly recommend her books to anyone, because it's so bingeable and it's very character based rather than plot based, and you get 2 different sides of the coin, because since Magnolia is more of the vapid socialite where she's super into fashion and is very inept to certain things, but Daisy Hates is trying to study to become a doctor while still dealing with her life being part of a mob family. And her brother's the leader of the mob family now. He's sort of like the crime boss. And their specialty is art dealership. Everyone asks whether you can skip Magnolia Park's books, but no. There's different books that are interconnected and the events happen concurrently. So yes, read it as it was published. The next genre I want to get into is another short genre that is not really particularly a favorite of mine. It's more of my palate cleanser genre. It's more of the suspense, mystery, thriller kind of genre. And the first book well, the first author I want to recommend is Frida McFadden. She has written the series of the Housemaid series. We follow a character named Millie. Millie has a secretive past, and she ends up getting a job as a housemaid that works for the family Winchesters. She finds little secrets here and there about the family, and I binged this whole entire series, and the most recent one is The Housemaid is Watching. It basically just follows her life throughout the years and the crimes that she has seen and the situations that she's been a part of. And Frida McFadden's writing is very bingeable. I love the twist at the end, and it's not the best writing in the world. It will get you back into reading or get out of a book slump. And the next book that is Frida McFadden's is called Never Lie. This one follows a couple who ends up moving to this house where a former psychiatrist used to live, and they found out that she went missing, and they find secrets that could lead to them discovering what happened to her, and the twist at the end was great as well. Another book that I recommend for suspense thrillers is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. It follows a podcaster named Alex, and she runs into a character named Josie, and Josie asks to be a part of one of her story podcasts because she wants to explain her story. And in a series of podcasts and meetings between the two characters, she finds out that Josie has a past of her own and hiding a lot of secrets, and you never know really who is telling the truth. That's why it's called None of This Is True. She goes through and you decide whether or not she's telling the truth, because it's very twisty, and I love the twist at the end of this. The next thriller book that I recommend is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This book has very 50-50 reactions from people. I honestly enjoyed it myself. It follows a character who is a famous artist, and one night she ends up murdering her husband, and this follows a psychiatrist who comes into the asylum that she is committed to. She wants to study why she killed her husband, and you find out the truth and the twist, and you can't help but finish to the end because you want to know what happened. The next book is by Gillian Flynn, and it's called Gone Girl. Gone Girl follows a character who ends up going missing. The main suspect is her husband, and after going through a series of back and forth between the past and the future, you don't know who to trust, and then you find out this big twist in the middle of what really happened, and I was so shocked by it. And Gillian Flynn's such a great writer. She gives you reason to keep on reading. And the last genre is my favorite genre of them all. It's fantasy. I love anything fantasy. High fantasy, fantasy romance, romancy, young adult fantasy, every single bit of fantasy that you can get into, I love. And it's my favorite genre of them all, and it's going to have the most recommendations. The first one is Harry Potter. This book series is the reason why I'm such a big reader now, and also why I love fantasy so much. At this point, I'm sure everyone knows the story of Harry Potter and the school that he attends. It's called Hogwarts, and he attends with his friends Ron and Hermione. And this book really got me into the magical world. This one showed me the trope of found family before even finding out what the trope of found family was. So I highly recommend this whole entire book series. It's really a lot more deeper than a lot of people think it is, because a lot of people think when they get into Harry Potter, or they've heard about Harry Potter, they think it's going to be very fluffy. It's just a bunch of following a magical school, but it gets so much deeper than that, and as the books go on, it gets darker and darker, and you just see a lot of things that happen to these characters that you're just so invested in. And I've cried so much in a lot of the books. I get it's a long series to get into, but I'd highly recommend if you want something that has a lot of books in it, and it's what made me a reader in the first place. I can't not put it on this list. The next book is Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. This book is classified as middle grade, so it's very, very easy to get into. It's very elementary how it's written, but the whole entire world is so great. I read this later on in life when I was a little bit older, and when I first read the first chapter, I thought it was a little bit too juvenile for me. But as you keep reading with the story and you keep reading about the whole entire world, it follows more of a Greek mythology retelling, where it follows a character named Percy Jackson who finds out that he's a demigod. And demigods are half gods, half human, and his mom is a human, and he's descended from Poseidon. And he attends a summer camp called Camp Half-Blood. He makes friends with a character named Grover and Annabelle. It follows their adventures going on while going through school and the big villains that they have to come across because of the fact that they're demigods, and I highly recommend this series. It doesn't matter how old you are. Yes, it's classified as middle grade, but I think this can highly reach to a lot of people. Sorry if there's any lighting changes or angle changes. My camera was overheating, so I had to take a little break. And I wanted to finish the last bit of this video. The next book I wanted to talk about is sort of like it's a dystopian. It's Hunger Games. Hunger Games follows a character named Katniss. There's different districts in her area where they're all in poorer parts of the area. And there's a place called the Capital where all the well-off people live. And there's an event called the Hunger Games that happens every so often. And there's tributes. One male, one female gets chosen from every single district where they have to compete for their lives and become the winner. And they're sort of like the entertainment for the people in the capital. And I absolutely love this series. I read it years ago, and they also came out with a movie for it. I'm sure everyone knows about this, but in case you didn't know, I love the way it was written. It's very great for getting to reading because it's such a bingeable series, and it makes you think more about the society that they live in and how Katniss becomes sort of like the voice of the rebellious group. So highly recommend. The next book is Twilight series. I think everyone knows what the Twilight series is. It's very cheesy. It follows a group of vampires and werewolves, and it's set in Washington, and it's the reason why fall is called the Hoa 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 season. This follows a girl named Bella. She is human, and she runs into a group of vampires who are the Cullens, and it starts from there. And if you ever want to get into reading, I highly recommend the Twilight series. It's near and dear to my heart. Of course, it's very cheesy. I watched the movies just for the cheesiness factor and the nostalgia factor. It's obviously not the best written, not the best characters, and it's one of the worst love triangles ever made, but it's such a bingeable series, and I think any beginner reader would love to read it if you just want very fast fantasy to get into and you love werewolves and vampires. Easy series to get into, so I highly recommend. The next series I recommend is the Shadow Me series. There are about 6 books in this whole entire series, but there are a bunch of like novellas, so in total there's like 11 books. It is not necessary to read all 11 books. I think originally it was supposed to be a 3-book series, but for some reason the author decided to extend it to 6, and the last 3 books it kind of adds a different storyline to it that was okay. The first 3 are my favorite, and if you don't want to read the whole entire series, you really don't have to. And the novellas are literally the same story told from different perspectives, but this follows a girl named Juliet, and she sort of has a power that kind of affects a lot of people, and she's been sort of institutionalized for the past 10 years, and she's stuck in a dystopian world, but it's a fantasy dystopian world, and she ends up rooming with an old childhood best friend named Adam, and they end up trying to find a way to try to escape the institution, and she ends up being a part of this big rebellious group. If you ever were on TikTok for book talk and you know about book boyfriends, Aaron Warner is one of the top book boyfriends of TikTok, and I highly agree. If you want an incredibly bingeable series, Shatter Me. I read this whole entire series within like a week, and this was even before I even got back into reading. Maybe this was like a few years ago, and I remember wanting to read the next book because every single book sort of like left off in a cliffhanger, and it follows a group of people that Juliet ends up finding, and it's sort of like, I want to say it's comparable to sort of the X-Men universe where they all have different abilities. I don't want to talk too much about it, just pick it up. I highly recommend. The next series I want to talk about is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. This follows 2 characters named Scarlet and Donatella. There's an event that comes every single year, I want to say, called Caraval, where it's sort of like a trial-based games and carnival-based games, and Donatella and Scarlet both get invited into this games and they go attend, and it's ran by a character named Legend. It's such an easy series to get into. I love how whimsical everything is, and I like the trials that they were based in because I do like the carnival aspect of it, and there's characters called Fates that are sort of like Fates and tarot cards. It's super interesting and I highly recommend. The next series is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. It is a part of the same universe as Caraval, and actually follows a character who is a villain in Caraval, and you follow this character to this trilogy, and it sort of explores what happens if you fall in love with the villain. I love this series a lot more than Caraval because this one is so much more fairy tale based. I love the characters in this much more, so I highly recommend. It's a 3-book series. And then another series, it's another trilogy that's easy to get into, is Cruel Prince by Holly Black. It's sort of like a fae retelling, more fairy creepy like like, sort of like Grimm's kind of fairy tales kind of deal. And it follows a girl named Jude who's a human, and she lives in the fairy world. She, along with her sister, gets bullied by the other fairies in this world, and she ends up getting to know a character named Carden. And Carden is sort of like the leader of all the bullies in this world, and they end up falling in love. It's very, very true enemies to lovers series, and it's very, very, very easy to get into. The world is not that heavy, and when you get into it, you just want to find out what's happening, because I love how the world is described in this one, and it's another trilogy. And the next series I want to recommend is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This one follows the Grishaverse universe. It's a very unique magic system, and my preference for this series is another series by Leigh Bardugo called Six of Crows, but I feel like Six of Crows is a little bit more complex, and I feel like Shadow and Bone does a really good job of laying the foundation of this world, so this one's a lot more easier to get into, especially if you're trying to get back into reading. This follows a girl named Alina. She's a map maker for the army, and she ends up finding out during one of her duty stations that she might have some powers, because the Grishas are the ones who have powers. She runs into a character named Darkling. So incredibly easy to get into. Not my favorite series at all. It's meh. I don't really like connect to a lot of the characters. I highly recommend for getting back into reading. The next book I want to recommend is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is so easy to get into. It's Hunger Games, but with a lot more romance. We follow a character named Peyton, and Peyton is an ordinary. She does not have any magical powers whatsoever, but in this world, ordinaries are executed if you don't have any magical powers. So she's had to sort of like run a con against everyone and pretends that she has sort of like psychic powers, but she's just really good at telling people's tales. She's sort of like the Sherlock Holmes of this universe. She gets entered into a trial where she has to fight for her life, and it's a love story where she falls for Kai. It's a story where the guy falls first and harder. It just follows what happens afterwards, and it's like sort of like an enemies to lovers kind of thing again. Of course, have to mention Akatar by Sarah J. Maas. I highly recommend this book to anyone who is getting into reading. If you know how big it became over the past few years and how much of a sensation it became, it brought a lot of people back into reading and introduced a lot of people to fantasy, and I'm so happy for that, because it led me to my other favorite series by her called Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass is a little bit bigger of a series to get into. It's more fantasy with a little bit of romance, and there's a lot of characters you have to follow. But in this one, it's a lot more romancy in a fantasy world, where it's so much easier to get into. The characters are really easy to read about, and it's very bingeable, and it follows a character named Feyre, and Feyre lives in the human world. She has to take care of her family because they all live in a impoverished world, because unfortunately some bad debts that her dad got them into, she has to hunt for her family and find animals that she could sell to the market. But unfortunately, during one of her hunting exhibitions, she ends up killing a fae, and as a payback for killing a fae, a lord of one of the lands comes to collect and ends up taking her back to the fae world in order for her to replace the life of the dead fae. And it's a love story, and I read this a few years ago and I was okay about it, but then when I got back into reading last year, I decided to pick it up again because I wanted to see what the fuss is about, and everyone says that the second book is way better. And yes, they are correct. The second book is, I think, where the story really starts. And this one is just sort of like a prequel to what it is, but I can't say more because I don't want to spoil anything, but I highly recommend if you're getting back into reading. And there's a reason why it's such a sensation anyways, because it's so easy to get into. The world is very easy to get into, and I think it's a great introduction to fantasy. And the second to last book that I want to recommend if you're trying to get back into reading is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a duology that follows a character named Iris and Roman. They're both rivals at the same newspaper agency, and they're trying to compete for the same position. And they both have magical typewriters. Iris has a brother, Forrest, who has been deployed for the longest time and hasn't heard from him, so she decides to write a letter to him and puts it into a wardrobe. And she ends up finding out the letter disappears, and she ends up conversing with somebody who writes back to her. And later on you find out Roman is the one who owns the other magical typewriter. This one's more of a romance set in a sort of fantasy world. It's sort of a god war that is going on, where it's gods versus goddesses, and I love the writing in this story. It's very beautifully written, and it's a letter based, and the love story between Roman and Iris is so beautifully written. I love the character so much, and it's a duology, so it's incredibly short. and I highly recommend. The last book that I want to recommend is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. If you love dragons, if you love academic setting and with romance in it and a male character who has shadow powers, you will love this book. It's incredibly easy fantasy to get into, and I love the academic setting of it. This follows a character named Violet, and Violet is a daughter of the general of the school, and she wants to get into the scribe quadrant because that's what she's been trying to study for her whole entire life, but her mom has other plans. She wants her to get into the writer's quadrant, and it's a very high stakes kind of quadrant because not a lot of people live. The first thing you have to do to get into this quadrant is cross a parapet, and a lot of people don't make it past the parapet. So Violet has a disability that makes it harder for her to do normal everyday things compared to the rest of the students. So she has to prove herself in this. Love how the dragons are written in this book. So if you love dragons, I highly recommend. I hope you end up picking any of these books. Doesn't matter which book or which genre you love, I highly recommend any of these books to get into reading. Reading is my favorite hobby of all time, and I want everyone to share this hobby. I'm always highly recommending books to people, and if you don't want to read any of these physical, there's always digital books as well. A lot of people think that you can only read Kindle books on Kindle devices, but you don't have to. If you have an iPad, if you have a phone, anything like that, or your computer, you can download the Kindle app and start downloading any books digitally through the Kindle app. And also I highly recommend audiobooks as well. If you have a hard time reading physical books or reading on a screen, audiobooks I highly recommend. There's a lot of great narrators out there, and also there are different iterations of audios. Like for example, for Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, they both have graphic audios that it sounds like you're listening to a movie. So I hope you guys pick up any of these books. I hope you enjoyed the recommendations, and let me know in the comments below if you end up picking any of them up. And if you want more videos like this in the future, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!